You know, when a war ends, you kind of expect peace to be what comes next, right? But after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, what followed wasn't peace. Not even close. It was something way more tangled and tense. So today, we're going to dig into that messy aftermath and try to figure out why a real, lasting peace just never got off the ground.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? The fighting stopped, sure, but the conflict itself, it just hardened. A temporary ceasefire morphed into this violent new reality that would go on to shape the entire region for decades. So why? Well, the answers are all tangled up in the lines they drew on the map, the millions of lives that were completely turned upside down, and the chances for peace that were ultimately just missed.
Okay, so the first thing you've got to get your head around is that the end of the war wasn't a political settlement. It was basically a military timeout, made official through a bunch of armistice agreements that created this super fragile and deeply unstable new reality. So over the course of 1949, you see Israel signing these separate deals with its neighbors, and it's so important to understand what they were and what they weren't. They were armistice agreements, which means they were designed for one thing and one thing only, to stop the shooting. They drew up military lines, not permanent, recognized international borders. Think of it like hitting the pause button, not signing a real peace treaty. And man, those lines, they were a total mess. Some of them followed old borders, but the most important one, the 200-mile frontier with Jordan, was basically drawn wherever the armies happened to be standing when the music stopped. This left Israel with this incredibly thin, 10-mile-wide waste in the middle of the country. Get this, a tank could, in theory, drive across Israel in 15 minutes. This wasn't a border designed for peace, it was a front line frozen in time.
And look, this isn't just us looking back with 2020 hindsight. This quote actually comes from an official Israeli police report, way back in 1953. Even then, they knew these borders were a disaster waiting to happen. The report went on and on about how the line ran just a few feet from major roads, how it cut farmers off from their own fields, and in some spots, it literally sliced villages right in two. It was basically a recipe for disaster, for constant daily friction.
Okay, so you've got these new lines on a map, but what did that actually mean for the people living there? We need to zoom in now and look at the human reality of this new frontier. Because for everyone, on both sides of the line, life suddenly became about loss, about huge demographic shifts, and just constant everyday struggle. For Israel, this brand new country, the human cost was just staggering. 6,000 of its people were killed. And to really wrap your head around that number, you got to remember that the entire Jewish population at the time was only 650,000. That's almost 1% of the entire population gone. This new nation was really born out of trauma, fighting for its life from day one. And as if that wasn't enough, the tiny country was facing this massive, unprecedented wave of people. Between 1948 and 1951, 700,000 Jewish immigrants came flooding in. A lot of them were survivors of the Holocaust with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Others were refugees fleeing from Arab countries. I mean, think about it. The population more than doubled in just 3 years. The strain on the country was almost unimaginable. Now, on the other side of that brand new line, the war created a totally catastrophic refugee crisis for the Palestinians. Historians figure we're talking somewhere in the ballpark of 700,000 people. That's roughly half of the entire Palestinian Arab population at the time, who lost their homes and became refugees in the countries next door. And what you see here is so important. These refugees didn't end up 1,000 miles away. They ended up in these huge, sprawling camps in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon and Syria. And a lot of the time, they were just miles, sometimes even walking distance from the homes they just lost. They were now living right on top of those new, incredibly tense armistice lines. So just picture this. You have this huge, desperate refugee population, cut off from their farms, their homes, their entire lives, by a line on a map they can't even see. What happens next? Well, it's pretty much inevitable, isn't it? People started crossing back over. They'd cross to pick the olives from their trees, to grab things they'd left behind, or just to see their old house one last time. And this whole thing, which the Israelis started calling infiltration, it just became the new, dangerous reality all along this frontier. You know, right after the war, in those early years, there were actually these little windows of opportunity, moments when a real peace felt like it was right there. There were secret meetings, offers were put on the table, but every single time, the chance just slipped away. So let's take a look at these missed chances. All right, so probably the biggest what if came from Jordan's King Abdullah. He really genuinely wanted to make a deal. At first, he wanted some towns back, but eventually he came down to just asking for a small strip of land to the sea. But Israel, feeling confident after winning the war, just wasn't willing to give up any meaningful territory. Their leader, David Ben-Gurion, felt like they had all the time in the world. So the talks just stalled out. A 5-year non-aggression pact that was pretty much ready to go just got put on a shelf and forgotten.
And this quote from King Abdullah, man, it just says it all. He told the negotiators that if he was going to make peace, he had to have something to show for it, to survive the backlash from the rest of the Arab world. He said, I could justify a peace by pointing to concessions made by the Jews, but without any concession, I am defeated before I even start. Basically, Israel's hard line left him empty-handed. He had nothing to sell to his own people.
Then, kind of out of nowhere, you get this surprising offer from Syria. The new military guy in charge, Colonel Zaim, came forward and proposed a separate peace treaty. And he offered to permanently resettle 300,000 Palestinian refugees inside Syria. I mean, this was a huge deal. All he asked for in return was to move the border to the middle of the Sea of Galilee so they'd get half the water. But Ben-Gurion, he flat out said no to giving up any territory or water rights. And just like that, the idea was dead. A few months later, Zaim himself was overthrown and killed. And then there's Egypt. Everyone knew Egypt was the key to any broader peace deal, and their demand was always the same. They wanted Israel to give up some land in the southern Negev desert to create a land bridge connecting Egypt to the rest of the Arab world. And Israel's response? Also always the same. They refused to give up an inch of the Negev. And with that, another door was slammed shut.
This quote from Ben-Gurion really gives you a window into the thinking of the Israeli leadership at the time. They really believed time was on their side. They'd won the war, they'd gotten these armistice agreements that kept things mostly quiet. The logic basically was that if they went chasing after peace, the Arabs would make them pay a price for it, in land or refugees. So why rush? Why pay a price when the current situation seemed, to them, pretty manageable?
So with all these failed peace talks, the consequences were huge. Any hope for a real settlement started to fade away, and a much harder, much more dangerous idea started to take hold on both sides, that the 1948 war wasn't the end of this story. And this is where the idea of the second round comes in. In the Arab world, the feeling was growing that the 1948 loss wasn't the end. It was just round one, a humiliating defeat that had to be avenged. And in Israel, all this talk just reinforced the idea that another war had to be coming, which led some of their own generals to think, well, maybe we should strike first. The fuse was lit. And just like that, the stage was being set for the next big war. You had Arab leaders talking about restoring Palestinian rights, which Israel heard as a threat to its very existence. The Arab newspapers were way more blunt, just openly calling for revenge. All the while, the constant, grinding violence along the border, the infiltrations and the Israeli retaliations created this vicious cycle where every little clash just proved to both sides that a huge war wasn't a matter of if, but when. Which leaves us with a really tough question to end on. When you look back at the hardened positions, the incredible human suffering, and those critical missed chances in the first few years, was there any other way this could have gone? Once that real chance for peace was lost, did the path to another bigger war just become inevitable? And that right there is the real tragedy of what happened after the war ended.